The morning sun cast long shadows across the flight deck of the USS Constellation as Admiral James Morrison stepped out of his command helicopter. His weathered face showed no emotion, but everyone on deck could sense the tension that followed him like a storm cloud. Word had already spread through the ship that he was here on official business, the kind that usually meant someone's career was about to end. Admiral Morrison had built his reputation on discipline and order. In his 32 years of naval service, he had never tolerated anything that threatened the smooth operation of his command. Today, he was here to deal with what his staff had described as a problem pilot who had been causing disruptions in the squadron. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Phoenix Chen had been the subject of multiple complaints over the past month. Other pilots whispered about her unconventional tactics, her tendency to question orders, and her habit of pushing aircraft beyond their recommended limits. The squadron commander, Captain Hayes, had filed 3 separate reports suggesting that Chen be transferred to a ground position before she caused a serious incident. As Morrison walked across the deck, he noticed the crew members snapping to attention with unusual precision. There was something different about the atmosphere today, though he couldn't quite place what it was. The normal chatter and activity seemed subdued, as if everyone was holding their breath. Chen had arrived on the Constellation 6 weeks earlier as part of a pilot exchange program. She came with impressive credentials from her previous assignments, but also with a reputation for being difficult to work with. Her previous commanding officers had described her as brilliant but unpredictable, someone who got results but didn't always follow the rulebook to get them. The Admiral made his way to the squadron briefing room where Captain Hayes was waiting with the paperwork for Chen's transfer. The room was stark and functional, with charts covering the walls and a large conference table in the center. Hayes stood as Morrison entered, his face grave with the weight of what they were about to do. "Admiral, thank you for coming personally," Hayes said, extending a folder thick with documentation. "I know this isn't the kind of thing you usually handle directly, but Chen's behavior has escalated to the point where I felt it necessary to involve you." Morrison took the folder and began scanning the contents. The reports painted a picture of a pilot who consistently challenged authority, modified mission parameters without authorization, and had been involved in several heated arguments with other squadron members. On paper, it looked like a clear case for removal. "What specific incidents triggered this recommendation?" Morrison asked, his voice steady and professional. Hayes pulled out a chair and gestured for the Admiral to sit. 3 weeks ago, during a training exercise, Chen broke formation without permission to investigate what she claimed was suspicious activity. Turned out to be a fishing vessel, but she had no way of knowing that when she made the decision. Last week, she modified her aircraft's configuration before a mission without clearing it through proper channels. And just yesterday, she had a public disagreement with Lieutenant Rodriguez about mission tactics that other crew members overheard. The Admiral nodded as he listened, making mental notes about each incident. On the surface, these seemed like legitimate concerns about discipline and chain of command. But something about the way Hayes presented the information made Morrison want to dig deeper. "Has she been given appropriate warnings about these behaviors?" Morrison asked. "Multiple warnings, sir, both verbal and written. She acknowledges them but then continues with the same patterns. It's like she thinks the rules don't apply to her," Hayes replied, his frustration evident. Morrison closed the folder and looked directly at Hayes. "And her performance metrics? Mission success rates? Accuracy scores? Safety record?" Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Well, sir, her performance numbers are actually quite impressive. She has a perfect safety record, and her mission completion rate is among the highest in the squadron. But performance isn't everything when discipline breaks down." The Admiral stood and walked to the window overlooking the flight deck. Below, he could see aircraft being prepared for the day's operations, crews moving with practiced efficiency. In his experience, problem pilots usually showed issues across all areas of their service, not just in their attitude toward authority. "I want to observe her in action before making any final decisions," Morrison announced. "When is her next scheduled flight?" Hayes checked his watch. "She's leading a patrol mission in 45 minutes. But, sir, I should mention that several pilots have expressed concerns about flying with her. Morale in the squadron has been affected by her presence." Morrison turned from the window to face Hayes. "Captain, in your opinion, Is Lieutenant Commander Chen a danger to herself or others in the cockpit? The question hung in the air for a moment as Hayes considered his response. Not directly, sir. Her flying skills are exceptional. It's more about her impact on unit cohesion and following proper procedures. Then we'll observe this mission before proceeding with any transfers, Morrison decided. I want to see how she performs under pressure and how she interacts with her wingmen during actual operations. Hayes looked like he wanted to argue, but knew better than to challenge the Admiral's decision. Yes, sir. Should I inform Chen that you'll be observing? No. I want to see her natural behavior, not a performance for my benefit. Morrison picked up the folder again. And Captain, I want you to personally brief me on the specific tactical decisions she makes during this mission. I'm interested in understanding her thought process. As Hayes prepared to leave the briefing room, Morrison noticed something that caught his attention. On the squadron roster board, next to each pilot's name was their call sign. Most were standard military nicknames, but one stood out among the others. Next to Lieutenant Commander Chen's name was written Phoenix in bold letters, but below it, in smaller text, was another designation that made Morrison pause. The Admiral stared at the board for a long moment, something stirring in his memory. He had seen that particular call sign combination before, many years ago, in a classified report that had crossed his desk when he was a junior officer. But it couldn't be the same person, could it? Captain Hayes, Morrison called out as the other officer reached the door. Yes, sir? Tell me about Chen's background. Where did she serve before coming here? Hayes consulted his notes. She came from the test pilot program at Edwards Air Force Base. Before that, she was with a special operations unit that's mostly classified. Her file has several redacted sections that I don't have clearance to access. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. The pieces were starting to fit together in a way that changed everything about this situation. If Chen was who he was beginning to suspect she might be, then removing her from active duty would be more than just a mistake. It would be a catastrophic error in judgment. On second thought, Captain, delay any transfer paperwork until after I've had a chance to review her complete file, Morrison ordered, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. Sir, is there something wrong? Morrison was already heading toward the door. Possibly everything, Captain. I need to make some calls before that mission launches. As the Admiral hurried toward his temporary office, his mind raced through the implications of what he had just realized. If Lieutenant Commander Chen was indeed who he thought she was, then the complaints about her unconventional methods and disregard for standard procedures took on an entirely different meaning. Those weren't character flaws. They were the traits that had made her one of the most valuable assets in the entire military. The question now was whether he could verify her identity and stop the transfer process before it was too late. Because if Chen was removed from active duty due to a misunderstanding about her background and methods, the Navy would be losing someone whose skills and experience were quite literally irreplaceable. Morrison reached his office and immediately began placing calls to his contacts in naval intelligence. As he waited for the secure connections to go through, he kept thinking about that call sign designation he had seen on the board. If he was right about what it meant, then everything about this situation was about to change dramatically. The sound of aircraft engines spinning up on the flight deck reminded him that Chen's mission was about to begin. Whatever he discovered in the next few minutes would determine not just her future, but possibly the security of operations that went far beyond anything happening on this carrier. Admiral Morrison's hands trembled slightly as he dialed the secure number for naval intelligence. The phone rang 3 times before a crisp voice answered. Intelligence Division, Commander Walsh speaking. Commander, this is Admiral Morrison aboard the USS Constellation. I need immediate verification on a classified personnel file. Security clearance level Alpha 7. There was a pause on the other end. Admiral, I'll need to verify your identity and authorization code before proceeding. Morrison provided the required information, his impatience growing as precious minutes ticked away. Through his office window, he could see the flight deck crew making final preparations for the morning patrol mission. Chen would be airborne soon, and if his suspicions were correct, he needed to know before she launched. Authorization confirmed, Admiral. What specific information do you require? I need details on Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, currently assigned to my carrier. Specifically, I need confirmation of any special operations background and previous classified assignments. Her call sign appears to be Phoenix, with a secondary designation that I believe might be Nightshade. The silence on the other end of the line stretched longer than Morrison was comfortable with. When Commander Walsh finally spoke, his voice had taken on a different tone entirely. Admiral, can you confirm you are alone and on a secure line? Confirmed. What can you tell me about Chen? Sir, Lieutenant Commander Chen is listed under the highest classification levels in our system. She's part of a program called Operation Shadow Wing, which I can only discuss in very general terms, even with your clearance level. Morrison felt his stomach drop. Operation Shadow Wing was a program he had heard whispered about in the highest levels of command, but he had never been briefed on its specifics. It was rumored to involve pilots with capabilities that went far beyond normal military training. Commander, I need you to understand the situation. Chen is about to be transferred off my ship due to disciplinary issues. Her squadron commander has filed multiple complaints about her conduct. The response was immediate and sharp. Admiral, any transfer of Lieutenant Commander Chen requires approval from the Secretary of Defense himself. She is not under normal chain of command protocols. Who authorized this transfer recommendation? Morrison realized he was in the middle of something much larger than a simple disciplinary issue. Captain Hayes, my squadron commander, he's been documenting incidents of insubordination and failure to follow standard procedures. Admiral, with respect, Captain Hayes doesn't have the security clearance to understand what Lieutenant Commander Chen's real mission parameters are. Her insubordination is likely her following orders that come from a level above anyone on your ship. The Admiral sank into his chair as the full implications hit him. Chen wasn't a problem pilot at all. She was an operative working under classified orders, and her unusual behavior was probably part of whatever mission she had been assigned to complete while stationed on his carrier. What do I need to know about her background? Morrison asked, though he wasn't sure he really wanted to hear the answer. What I can tell you is limited, sir. Lieutenant Commander Chen graduated top of her class from the test pilot program, but she was recruited for Shadow Wing based on capabilities that extend beyond normal pilot training. She has successfully completed 17 classified missions over the past 4 years, including 3 that prevented significant threats to national security. Morrison's mind raced as he processed this information. The incidents Captain Hayes documented, her braking formation, modifying aircraft configurations, questioning orders, were these part of her actual mission? I cannot confirm specific operational details, Admiral, but I can tell you that Shadow Wing operatives are trained to recognize threats and opportunities that normal pilots might miss. They are also authorized to deviate from standard protocols when necessary to complete their objectives. The sound of jet engines reached a crescendo outside, and Morrison knew Chen's flight was about to launch. He had to make a decision immediately about whether to ground her or let the mission proceed. Commander, is Chen currently on an active Shadow Wing assignment aboard my ship? That information requires clearance above my level, Admiral. But I can tell you that any interference with her duties could compromise operations that are vital to national security. Morrison ended the call and immediately dialed Captain Hayes. The captain answered on the first ring. Captain, abort the transfer paperwork on Lieutenant Commander Chen immediately. Sir, has something changed? Everything has changed, and I need you to understand that Chen's behavior patterns may not be what they appear to be. I want you to review every incident you've documented and consider alternative explanations for her actions. Hayes sounded confused. Alternative explanations, sir? Captain, what if Chen wasn't breaking formation without authorization, but was instead responding to intelligence that you weren't aware of? What if her aircraft modifications weren't reckless changes, but necessary adjustments for a specific mission requirement? There was a long pause before Hayes responded. Are you suggesting that Chen has been operating under classified orders this entire time? I'm suggesting that we may not have the complete picture of why she's really here. Morrison walked back to the window and watched as Chen's aircraft taxied into position for takeoff. Even from this distance, he could see that her pre-flight routine was different from the other pilots. She spent more time checking specific instruments and appeared to be running additional system checks that weren't standard procedure. Admiral, if what you're suggesting is true, then some of the other pilots' complaints about her might make sense. Rodriguez mentioned that Chen seemed to know things about their patrol routes that she shouldn't have known. And Lieutenant Peterson said she asked questions about radar signatures that seemed oddly specific. Morrison realized that Chen had probably been gathering intelligence during her routine interactions with the squadron, not causing problems. Her questions and observations weren't signs of a difficult personality, but indicators of someone trained to notice details that others missed. Captain, I want you to personally observe Chen's flight today. Don't interfere with her decisions, but pay close attention to everything she does. I have a feeling we're about to learn something important about why she's really here. As Morrison watched Chen's aircraft prepare for takeoff, he noticed something else that caught his attention. Two other aircraft were positioned nearby, but they weren't part of the scheduled patrol mission. These planes had different markings and appeared to be equipped with specialized equipment that he didn't recognize. Hayes, can you see the flight deck from your position? Yes, sir. Are those two additional aircraft part of Chen's mission? Hayes was quiet for a moment as he presumably looked out at the deck. Sir, those aircraft weren't on any flight schedule that I was aware of. I assumed they were being prepared for a later mission. Morrison felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. Chen wasn't just flying a routine patrol mission. She was leading some kind of specialized operation, and the other aircraft were probably part of whatever her real objective was. Captain, I need you to monitor all communications during this flight. If Chen is operating under classified orders, there might be radio traffic on frequencies we don't normally monitor. The Admiral continued watching as Chen's aircraft moved to the launch position. Even her takeoff procedure seemed different from standard protocol. She performed additional system checks and appeared to be coordinating with ground control in ways that suggested this wasn't a routine departure. As Chen's aircraft launched from the carrier, followed closely by the two unmarked planes, Morrison realized he had been seconds away from making one of the biggest mistakes of his career. Removing Chen from active duty wouldn't have just been unfair to her personally. It could have compromised whatever critical mission she had been assigned to complete. The question now was what Chen's real objective was, and whether the recent complaints about her behavior were actually signs that she was close to completing whatever task had brought her to his ship. Morrison had a growing suspicion that the next few hours would reveal something that would change how everyone aboard the Constellation understood their mission. As he prepared to head to the command center to monitor Chen's flight, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that the young pilot with the unusual call sign was about to prove just how wrong everyone had been about her true purpose aboard his ship. Admiral Morrison arrived at the command center just as Chen's aircraft reached its patrol altitude. The room was filled with the usual activity of flight operations, but Morrison noticed an additional communications station that hadn't been there during his previous visits to the ship. Two technicians wearing headsets were monitoring equipment that looked far more sophisticated than standard carrier communications gear. Captain Hayes approached Morrison with a puzzled expression. Admiral, we're receiving radio traffic on frequencies that aren't part of our normal operations. The communications appear to be between Chen's aircraft and someone off-ship, but we can't identify the source. Morrison moved closer to the communications station, where one of the technicians was transcribing the transmissions. The conversation was brief and used code words that he didn't recognize, but the tone was clearly operational rather than routine patrol chatter. Phoenix confirms visual contact with target package. Request permission to proceed with secondary objectives. The response came through with crystal clarity. Permission granted. Nightshade protocol is now active. You have authorization for full discretion. Morrison felt his blood run cold. Nightshade protocol was a term he had heard only once before, during a classified briefing about operations that were so sensitive they required presidential authorization. Whatever Chen was really doing out there, it was far more serious than anyone on his ship had realized. Captain, I need you to clear this area of all non-essential personnel, Morrison ordered quietly. What we're about to witness may be classified at the highest levels. Hayes immediately began directing other crew members away from the communications station, leaving only Morrison, Hayes, and the two specialized technicians. The Admiral realized that these technicians had probably been placed on his ship specifically to support Chen's real mission. On the radar display, Morrison could see that Chen's aircraft had deviated significantly from the planned patrol route. Instead of following the coastline as scheduled, she was heading toward a position about 60 miles northeast of the carrier's current location. The two unmarked aircraft that had launched with her were maintaining formation but had spread out in what appeared to be a search pattern. "Admiral," one of the technicians said quietly, "we're receiving updated intelligence feeds. There's a situation developing that Lieutenant Commander Chen has been monitoring for the past 3 weeks." Morrison authorized the technician to brief him on what they knew. The information that followed explained everything about Chen's behavior during her time aboard the Constellation. For nearly a month, intelligence services had been tracking a group of arms dealers who were using modified fishing vessels to transport weapons to terrorist organizations. The operation was sophisticated enough that they had evaded detection by standard patrol aircraft. But Chen's specialized training and equipment had allowed her to identify patterns that others had missed. Every time Chen had broken formation during training exercises, she had actually been investigating vessels that appeared suspicious based on intelligence indicators that weren't available to the rest of the squadron. Her modifications to aircraft configurations had been necessary to accommodate specialized surveillance equipment. And her arguments with other pilots had occurred when they inadvertently interfered with her surveillance operations. "Phoenix to base, I have positive identification on 3 vessels operating in formation. Cargo signatures match expected profile for target operation." Morrison watched the radar display as Chen's aircraft began what appeared to be a complex intercept maneuver. The fishing vessels she had identified were operating in international waters, which meant any action taken against them would require precise coordination with other agencies. Captain Hayes leaned toward Morrison. "Sir, should we launch additional aircraft to support her?" "Negative. If Chen needed backup, she would have requested it through proper channels. We need to let her complete whatever she's been sent here to do." The Admiral realized that Chen's entire assignment aboard the Constellation had been carefully planned. Her cover as a problem pilot had allowed her to conduct surveillance operations without attracting attention to her real objectives. The complaints about her behavior had actually provided perfect cover for her mission activities. Over the next 20 minutes, Morrison watched as Chen coordinated a complex operation that involved not just her aircraft, but Coast Guard cutters that had been positioned in the area and what appeared to be special operations teams that had been deployed from submarines. The precision and scope of the operation made it clear that this had been planned for months, not days. Phoenix confirmed successful intercept of all 3 vessels. Target cargo secured and personnel in custody. Mission complete. The communications station erupted in quiet congratulations from various agencies that had been monitoring the operation. Morrison realized he had just witnessed the culmination of one of the most sophisticated counterterrorism operations he had ever seen. As Chen's aircraft began its return to the carrier, Morrison turned to Captain Hayes with a new understanding of everything that had transpired over the past month. "Captain, I owe you an explanation, though much of what you've just witnessed remains classified. Lieutenant Commander Chen was never a problem pilot. She's one of the most elite operatives in our military, and she's been using our ship as a base for an operation that just prevented weapons from reaching terrorist organizations." Hayes looked stunned. "Sir, does this mean that all of the incidents I documented were actually part of her mission?" "Every single one. Her insubordination was her following orders from a level of command that we weren't aware of. Her reckless behavior was actually careful execution of surveillance and intercept operations that required capabilities beyond normal pilot training." Morrison realized that Chen's superiors had deliberately allowed her cover story to proceed to the point where she was nearly transferred off the ship. It was a perfect test of whether the operation could remain secret even under the scrutiny of formal military discipline procedures. When Chen's aircraft touched down on the carrier deck 30 minutes later, Morrison was waiting for her. As she climbed out of the cockpit, he could see the focused intensity that marked someone who had just completed a high-stakes mission successfully. "Lieutenant Commander Chen, I believe we need to have a conversation about your real assignment aboard my ship." Chen removed her helmet and looked directly at the Admiral with the confident bearing of someone who no longer needed to maintain a cover story. "Admiral Morrison, I was wondering when you would figure out what was really happening here. Your call sign was the key. Nightshade isn't just a nickname, is it?" "No, sir. It's a designation for operatives trained in deep cover operations that require maintaining civilian or standard military identity while conducting classified missions." Everything about my time on your ship was designed to test whether I could complete my objectives while appearing to be exactly what I wasn't. Morrison shook his head in amazement. And Captain Hayes's complaints? Were actually helpful to my mission. Being seen as a problem pilot meant that other crew members avoided asking too many questions about my activities. It provided perfect operational cover. As they walked across the flight deck, Morrison reflected on how close he had come to making a catastrophic mistake. If he had proceeded with Chen's transfer without investigating her background, it would have compromised an operation that had taken months to develop and had potentially saved lives by preventing weapons from reaching terrorist organizations. Chen, I have to ask, how many other operatives like you are currently serving in positions where their commanding officers don't know their real mission? She smiled for the first time since he had met her. Admiral, that's classified at a level above even your clearance. But I can tell you that the military is more complicated than most people realize. Morrison realized that his encounter with Chen had taught him something important about the nature of modern military operations. In an era where threats could come from anywhere and take any form, the military needed people who could operate in ways that seemed to contradict traditional discipline and chain of command structures. As he watched Chen walk toward the debriefing room, where she would finally be able to discuss her real mission with people who understood what she had been doing, Morrison felt a profound sense of respect for the dedication and skill required to maintain such a complex cover identity while executing critical operations. The Admiral made a mental note to review his procedures for handling problem personnel in the future. After today, he would always look deeper before making assumptions about why someone might be acting in ways that seem to contradict military standards. Because sometimes, the most important missions required people who could appear to be exactly what they were not.